Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. On behalf of the Royal Family of Gondal, Ashish Doshi, Honorary Director, and myself, welcome to a very special evening here at the Royal Opera House, Mumbai. As many of you know, the Royal Opera House opened in October of 2016 after a hiatus of 26 years. We've received an overwhelming response from the city and our collaborators. Some of you I can kind of see here today, so just wanted to say thank you. And for those who haven't been here before, we'd like to say welcome and hope you come back again and again. And for your benefit, a very, very brief introduction about this iconic venue. Widely touted as Mumbai's cultural crown jewel, the Royal Opera House is India's only standing opera house. Inaugurated in 1911 by King George V, was eventually completed in 1916. The space became a cinema in later years before closing its doors. Owned by the Royal Family of Gondal since the 50s, it was under the leadership and the patronage of the current Maharaja of Gondal, Shri Jyotendra Singh Ji, that it was restored. Today, it stands as a key performance and creative hub in the city's cultural landscape while being a premium heritage landmark. Last year, we received an award of merit in the 2017 UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Heritage Conservation. As part of the larger curatorial vision to energize this venue, we aim to provide a unique platform in the city for people to encounter art. The Royal Family is keen to continue their support in showcasing young and emerging talent. Many of you in the room have collaborated with Avid Learning, and you know that art is one of the most important and robust verticals for us. Now at the Royal Opera House, we are planning interventions, experiential exhibitions, retrospectives, and installations. And we're doing this in collaboration with, some of you people in the room, leading galleries, artists, and institutions. In fact, in a very few days, we are going to present a week-long pop-up of cloud-themed artwork in collaboration with the Sakshi Gallery to coincide with the launch of novelist Chandrahas Chaudhary's new book, Clouds. So some of you all have actually experienced the outside. We have a wonderful open outside where you all may have had some refreshments. I hope you have. We have an open terrace. We have 3-4 levels in this iconic building. So please, if you have any ideas, proposals, or a dream, to reach out to us. We thrive on collaboration. So we want to reach out to you to bring art or art projects into the Royal Opera House, and that's one of the reasons why we're excited to host you here. So Royal Opera House and Avid Learning are honored to be having Mumbai Gallery Weekend here, and thank you all for being here. And now to the task at hand, tonight's lecture, Future-Proofing Art. We have Claire Su, Reena Kalat, Pooja Sood, and Maya Shvi. Will speak on the dynamic archival resources like the Asian Art Archive, Coach, Artisty, and the urgent question about how artists can work with them productively. Our moderator, Maya, has been with Artsy for over 4 years. Since 2014, she has been collaborating with gallery weekends around the globe and is leading these partnerships on the platform. Previously, she advised private and public collections and also worked as an art dealer. Artsy is a leading destination for exploration and collecting art from the world's top galleries and museums, art fairs, and auction houses. Artsy's mission is to make all the world art accessible to anyone with an art collection, or with an internet collection. Welcome, Anna, or Maya, sorry, she's got 2 names. Hope you have a wonderful discussion, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you for having us. Thank you all of you for coming to seeing this panel tonight. We're very honored to be here, and we thank all the organizers and everybody who contributed to making Mumbai Gallery Weekend what it is. And I'm excited to welcome my fellow speakers and panelists Pooja, Reena, and Claire to the stage. Claire Su is the co-founder and executive director of the Asia Art Archive. Pooja Sood, founding member and director of Coach, International Artists Association in Delhi, and Reena Kalat, artist and multidisciplinary Mumbai-based artist on this panel. So the title of this panel is Future-Proofing Art, and we all discussed, obviously, this title and thought a little bit beforehand, what does that actually mean? It's a term that comes from electronics and tech and means taking an item and trying to help it sustain throughout time and into the future. And if you think about childproofing or fireproofing, you always know what you're proofing something against. Whereas future-proofing has that question mark in it where we don't know what's going to happen. And so we are going to discuss a little bit what we can do to future-proof art institutions, future-proof artworks, and future-proof what, you know, we all work with and collaborate on to some extent. And so we will hear from my three wonderful, amazing, accomplished women, what they do in their respective fields. And then after that, we will discuss a little more, and I'm excited to hear how we will define future-proofing art together. So first, Claire, may I ask you?
Good evening, everybody. I'd just like to thank the Mumbai Gallarie Association for the very kind invitation to come and speak in this very, very grand venue. I feel like I should sing or something as opposed to talk about the Asia Archive here. But it's really an honor to be here. And thank you very much as well to Avid Learning for hosting us tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work I've been involved in for the last 17 years at the Asia Art Archive. And just in terms of thinking about the questions posed within tonight's panel, you know, it begins by saying that we've come a long way in 20 years. And just to give you a little bit about, for us to think about where we are situated at the Asia Art Archive, we are primarily based in Hong Kong. We're an independent non-profit organization. Although we do have Asia Art Archive India, so we have a small office in Delhi with our researchers there, Sabi Ahmed and Sneha Raghavan. And then also we have a mini site in New York and researchers based in Shanghai. But predominantly our team of about 38 people are based in Hong Kong. So just to kind of situate where the Asia Archive is, I'm going to start with this photo. Here you're looking at a photo that I actually found in my family album. It was a photo my aunt took when she came to visit Hong Kong in the 1970s. And here you see the sign where at the time China was very much closed to the world. And here you see a sign that says, "Welcome, from here we can see the nice view of China." And this is the border of Hong Kong at the time, which was still British until 1997. And here you're looking over across the border, and to the right you have a picture of Shenzhen. And Shenzhen was a sleepy fishing village at the time. Fast forward to today, and this is Shenzhen today. From a population of about 30,000, we are now looking at 11 million people. And obviously the city is growing much closer to Hong Kong as well. The borders, it's a very different kind of border at the same time. So just to give you a kind of perspective of how, you know, the space that we've been working in and how dramatically the city has been changing. And thinking as well about, you know, what's happened over the last 17 to 20 years. I just pull out a few figures as well. And our Asia Pacific, which is a magazine I think that was founded in 1993 in Australia and is now based out of Hong Kong, they came out with this almanac which comes out every year, which kind of charting each country within the Asia Pacific region in terms of figures and what's happened that year. And so on the left you have the first almanac that came out in 2005, 2006, and then the one that's just come out in 2018. And I just pulled up some figures, again, just trying to get a sense of where we've come in the last 20 years. And what's interesting, in fact, looking at India, is that there's fewer commercial galleries, so 107 compared to 117, which is quite unusual compared to some of the other countries within the almanac. But you're looking at 2 museums that had somehow a program for modern and contemporary art compared to 20 today. And then 5 non-profit or foundations compared to sort of 33 today. And if you look at China, at the same time, we've gone from commercial galleries from 155 to 841. And in terms of museums showing contemporary art, there are now about 187, and that doesn't count the hundreds of museums that have been built since that are for different disciplines. And then the foundations have gone from 27 to 40. So it's not meant to be a comparison of India and China, it's just to show that, you know, the scene has changed dramatically over the last, in this case, 12 years, because those are the figures, that's when the first almanac started. So while some things have changed, others have not. And so this just landed as one of many emails in my inbox. And you can't really see here, but it says the most searched artist in the Price database being Pablo Picasso still. And of course, you know, although it does say runner-up Yayoi Kusama coming close, so we do have an artist from, oh, wow, that was a dramatic, sorry. I can't sing, so you know, just thinking about that, so while some things have changed, others have not as well. And so just thinking about, you know, why the Asia Archive came about, I think this stratospheric sort of economic growth, the museumification of Asia, kind of the commodification of art at the same time, these have, you know, been well documented, and I think we all are aware, for those of us that have been working in the field for some time, that things have changed dramatically. And so while, you know, they're kind of almost staggering and dizzying developments, upon closer inspection, the flow of qi, so to borrow an analogy from Chinese medicine, seems to be flowing through only a few of the meridians. And really, for a very balanced and healthy system, you need all 12 meridians for qi to be flowing through all 12 meridians. Or if we were to take a sort of Ayurvedic approach, we would want all doshas to be balanced, and you wouldn't want too much pitta, perhaps in this case, in terms of yang as the analogy. So the archive really began, in a sense, modestly as a way to address the imbalance of yin within this art ecology, if you will. And for the majority of Asia, there's really a lack of resources, and there's a very little investment within sort of building a deeper knowledge infrastructure, especially around the recent art history. And so while you have institutions in Europe and Americas, you know, the academic institutions or museums that have done a great job in building this knowledge infrastructure, we don't have the same history within Asia for many obvious reasons. And so we really began in 2000 as a way to start, you know, bringing together materials that could be easily publicly accessible for research and for scholarship and for educational purpose, and really to try and take a step back and make sense of what's been happening in the dramatic developments that have been happening within the last few decades. So just a little bit about the archive. As I said, we're an independent nonprofit organization. We collect all different types of material. Over the last 17 years, we have built what is now the foremost physical library collection and digital collection online for the recent history of art from Asia. Here you see our library, and we work very closely with schools and art educators. But predominantly, a lot of our audiences are scholars, curators, artists, and people who are very much within the field. At the same time, we started to realize that it was really important that if research and scholarship around the recent history of art from Asia was going to happen, that primary source materials had to be made accessible. And here you see our online page for the research collections. And so what we began doing is really identifying individual and organizational archives that have been pivotal in developing discourses or the art scene within their respective fields, within their respective geographies, and working very closely with individuals to digitize their archives and to get the permission to make those publicly accessible for free online to really enable the scholarship to happen. And the idea really being that we would also be able to kind of shift the economics of research as well, because it's very expensive. A lot of art history departments, for example, in the US, they might want to be, there are individuals who might be wanting to do more in-depth research on the recent history of art from Asia, but it's very, very expensive to do that. And the materials also, if you come here, it's very difficult to access. And so here we've sort of brought these primary source materials to your laptop as such. And so another important point for us was also that we don't, this is meant to be sort of part of a decolonizing process, and so we were very mindful of the fact that we didn't want to buy archives and bring them to Hong Kong, which is, while a special administrative region, we're also part of China, but that it was very important as well to really nurture a network of multiple sites that this knowledge could be built up, and that these collections and these archives had to really stay within their place of origin. And so just being born in the digital age has made this possible, and obviously our work would not be possible if we were not living within this digital age. So many times people ask us, what exactly, oh, and just one more thing before I move on, I just want to say that you can't see here, so we have 32 research collections, but we have been working in India since 2009. Our projects have been led by our senior researcher, Sabi Ahmed, and we have worked on digitizing the archives of Geeta Kapoor, of Vivan Sundram, and then also working in Baroda with a number of very eminent scholars and artists there as well. So a lot of these research collections are online. And we do see that art history departments are being able to, around the world, are starting to teach this because of the materials available online, and more students starting to study this as well. So many people ask, there's so much out there, how do you go about deciding on what exactly it is that you digitize and that you bring into the archive? And so for us, it's not about being comprehensive. That would be an impossible task. But it really is about focusing on, figuring out where the key sites are and where the different discussions can happen across these sites. So they're entry points into sort of different streams of ideas or fields that have developed over the decades. We do have something called content priorities, and these are areas that we want to be known for. And so there's one called under the sites of construction, so I'm looking at where art history has been written. So if the academies haven't been writing it, and if the institutions and the museums, in our case in Hong Kong, have not been doing this work, where exactly has this art history been written? And so some of the areas that we've been looking at are art writing, exhibition histories, pedagogy. And then one of the other areas is complex geographies, which I'll touch on in more detail after this. Performance art is another area that has been important for us, women in art history, and then issues around custodianship is less of a content priority, but it's something that we feel that we should be constantly asking ourselves. How do we share this material? For us, it's really important that we are generous, and this is something that can be accessed for all. But also, how do we make sure that we are not just replacing other canons? And so how do we constantly be self-critical and open to discussing these things around the archive and custodianship? So I said I'd just like to expand on one of these content priorities a little bit, and just to take you through thinking about what it is that an archive can do. I mean, we think of an archive as kind of a stuffy room in a basement with lots of materials that are collecting dust. However, I think archives today have taken on a very different form because of the digital realm, and just because of the tools that are out there and that make this possible. And so thinking about an archive like the Asia Art Archive, I think we're quite unusual in the sense that normally archives are very much national in focus, and this archive is going across sites within different countries within Asia. And so at the same time, so while we like to think, we talk of a globalized world and we like to think that things are flowing, I think at the same time, it's very evident that we are also building more walls than ever. And the nation, this idea of the nation has never been so strong. And so we have 60 million refugees now in the world. We have a lot of contradictions happening, obviously internal migrants as well. There are some cities which are majority, minority, and yet if you look at sort of national institutions, these minority voices are not at all represented. So for us, one of the things I think that drove me to setting up the archive was really trying to think of a space that we could really focus on shared histories, the kind of connection of ideas, the way that knowledge has traveled over a long time before we were here on this earth. And so this is something in preparation I kind of pulled up, and here you have a picture of, it says Chinese and Indian police in Hong Kong. And so, you know, how do we forget about these histories and these connections for, and so, for example, in Hong Kong, some of our earliest policemen were from India. They were Sikhs and really part of, obviously, a British network. But it meant, you know, that we did have individuals from very different places in the world coming and settling in Hong Kong and making it their home. So just to think about how we, you know, how we set up something that we don't forget these connections and these histories at the same time. And obviously we're going to hear from Rena as well, but she was obviously an artist I immediately thought of in thinking about, this is a very well-known work. I'm not going to speak about her work because she's actually on this panel, so I will wait for that. But in terms of artists who are able as well, you know, and this is the promise, I would say, the potency of art, whether it's artists who are able to go across borders, or whether it's institutions like COGE as well, who are able to go across borders as well and set up these sometimes informal networks. So important. Of course, artists and institutions can do the opposite as well, but it's just the potential, I think, is something that is very exciting and probably the reason that many of us work in the field. So just to go back a bit to the archive and the Asia Archive, you know, what happens when we're told that, you know, we don't have an art history? And this is something that I was brought up with in Hong Kong, you know, being told Hong Kong doesn't have an art history, and no one's written the book for it, or, you know, multiple books for it. And what happens when suddenly you come across this? And this was the archive of an artist called Ha Bei-chun, who was born in 1925, died in 2009. And as well as being a sculptor, just to show you, this is the kind of work that he produced. At the same time, he was going around Hong Kong for about 40 years, documenting every single exhibition that he went to. So the family reached out to us a few years ago and said, look, the building is falling apart. You can see everything coming down here. Would you please preserve this archive? And we definitely don't have the space. Hong Kong is one of the most expensive places in terms of real estate in the world, although I think Bombay is pretty close. And we applied for funding. We were able to get funding to move the archive to a space that we're renting, for 2,000 square foot space that we're renting at the moment. And so we packed the entire archive. We had 600 boxes, and this is what it kind of, the process of packing, trying to figure out where everything has to go afterwards. And then down here to the right on the bottom, you can see the space now, and just kind of trying to make sense of 50 years of Hong Kong art history through this gentleman's eyes. So this is something that we're working on. And while we were very familiar with his documenting practice and his sculpting practice, we were not familiar upon various other discoveries when we came across these collage books, and we just didn't know what to make of them. In fact, it was a New York-based Lebanese artist, Walid Rad, who was doing a residency with us, who went to the archive, and he pulled out some kind of coffee table books, you know, it's called London Interiors. We said, oh, those aren't interesting to us, don't bother with those. He pulled them out, opened them up, and we realized that every single page had been collaged into, drawing on sources from all of the different magazines and other printed materials that he'd been collecting over his lifetime as well. And so this kind of making other worlds through these books and through these collages. And at the same time, you know, we think of Ha Bei-chun, he's always spoken of in terms of being a Hong Kong artist and a Hong Kong art history. And, you know, once you start opening up the archive, archives start telling you very different stories and leading you into different directions. And so this was a publication that we found that showed the Hong Kong artist Liu Shoukun, who is very much known for being the father of modern Chinese ink painting within Hong Kong, who had an exhibition at the Commonwealth together with the Pakistani artist who was resided in London, Ahmed Parvez, from 1926 to 1976. So suddenly we see different geographies being brought together through this archive, and then it leads us on to further research and questions. And so then we led to, for example, the Wahab Jaffer archive. Wahab Jaffer is a gentleman who is an artist, also a collector, and over 4 decades he organized and gathered various ephemeral and documentation and kept very close contact with various artists. So I think also as we looked into this archive, then it takes us in other directions, and so I thought I would just, this was one of the correspondence that was within his archive from FN Souza to Wahab, and here we have an envelope from the Hotel Heritage in Bombay. And this sort of opens up and complicates the geographies that we've been told as well. And we see that despite national art histories, there are individuals where these informal histories and conversations have taken place that are so important to our understanding of Asia. And it's kind of this kind of complex geographies as well. So, as I said earlier, we've been working in India on a number of, on digitizing a number of archives. And after that process, I think it just opened up so many questions. And so the team, under the incredible Sabi and Sneha, they began this project of putting together, or attempting to put together, a bibliography of art writing from India in the 20th century. I don't need to show you where India is, you know the map well, but please look at the dots, because these are the areas that we started to do the research around different languages, and we worked within 14, is that me to stop? I'll hurry up. Okay, so that's in 14 languages, and basically what we did is that we worked with a network of researchers across the country to really go to archives and to start building up a bibliography. And so I'll just give you an example of what we thought and then what happened afterwards. And so this was the initial list of artists that the researchers put together from Calcutta and Shantiniketan. And then this is the list that happened after we started doing the bibliography. So that's one page. That's the next page, and the next page, and the next page, yes. And so, again, for us, it's about really sharing these tools and sharing this content and this knowledge. And so we built an online platform, and it's called the Bibliography of Modern Contemporary Art Writing of South Asia. And we switched from India to South Asia because, going back to the map, you see that obviously, language goes beyond borders, and we went and began doing some research in Pakistan around Urdu. We had to go to Bangladesh around Bengali, and then for Tamil, we also went to Sri Lanka as well. This is all available online. Okay, I'm going to end now, and I'm just going to end and go back really to the artists that inspire and drive our work. And at the archive, I didn't talk so much about all of the different programs that we do, but we have a very active public programs throughout the year. And one of the key things for us is really to think about how we activate the archive in many different ways. And so we have worked with artists who've come in and helped us think through various issues around, from materials to memory to history. And so we worked with obviously an artist you must be very familiar with, Shilpa Gupta. That photo we never got. This project was also shown in Chemold last year. And here Shilpa really looked at our archives from Baroda and looked at, sort of individual histories as well, through friendship, love, and also sometimes the histories that don't quite match as well in terms of memory. And then finally, another artist project. This was a project by Map Office. They produced the Atlas of Asia Art Archive. And just to kind of think about the archive as a space that can constantly be reshaped and redeveloped, we invited Map Office, who are based in Hong Kong. They went through every single monograph in AA's collection, and they built this atlas of territories that artists are working on. And so each of those kind of represent like a travel brochure of the particular country that they've been working on. And it shows a very, very different kind of mapping of Asia. And you can't really read it, but then they brought these different texts together and interwove it too. And maybe I'll just end with the first sentence. Asia is a point of arrival and departure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, MGW, for coming together in this combined effort of celebrating art in the city, and Avid for hosting it at this wonderful location. I mean, what better than the crown jewel, the cultural crown jewel. So thank you all for joining us, and Claire for taking us through what Asia Art Archive has been doing over the last 17 years. That's a long time. I mean, and what's really vital is that it really brings together the whole region. I mean, we're all sort of working in our individual practices, and to have these sort of shared histories is, I thought of just sharing some works that, through which I can sort of delve into what, shapes the work, in a sense, the research material or archives that are an integral part of most artists' practice, whether it's an image bank as resource material, films people watch, artists watch, or poems and writing and so on. But I thought it might be, it might be a good idea to sort of take you through some of the works and foreground those, the material that results in shaping these. So this is a piece from 2016 that was recently shown at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it's a work created with the electric cable as transmitter of ideas, exchange as communication cable, but here sort of morphs into barbed wires and fences where the medium itself holds these inherent contradictions of being both carrier and a barrier itself. But it sort of traces the flows and movements of migrants historically from indentured labor to agriculture, industrializing societies and post-industrial societies. So what you see as this web work is actually looking at the movement of migrants. And it's a piece that I first made in 2011, and this was one of the more recent iterations of this, and has, so this is what some of the industrializing, sort of the way that the color codes are created are through this, this map. And a lot of the material that one sources and researches to form these or mark countries and codes and is sort of the backstory, and that's of course all of these sites that one today looks at. Sorry. Okay, is that any better? Yeah, because we don't really get to see the images, so I think it's kind of easier to turn towards the screen. And so yeah, these are all the countries that are first marked and then linked, and drawings. So I'm just sort of running you through a lot of the material that usually doesn't get seen, shown, and jumping back to 2003 when I first worked on a piece made using the rubber stamp as a kind of metaphor for the bureaucratic apparatus that both sort of confirms and obscures identities, either legitimizes or sort of stamps histories out of existence through, and most of these names were out of official records. I mean, the whole body of work that I built nearly over a decade was sourced from official records. And this was accompanied by a mock document that was on a like a legal stamp paper with the preamble of the Constitution of India as the promise of democracy and what it really. It was also made at a time post-2002 when much of the same debates about migrants, and the kind of insecurities about migrants coming into the city of Mumbai was the time that I started to, feel the need to include these names and stamp them within this mock document. And a lot of those were out of the directory, the Mumbai directory back then. And today, of course, a lot of the resource material comes from online sources, but we will talk about that and how that has changed, where one really had to go to physical archives in all those years, or for instance, in this case, they're names of people, of freedom fighters that form the disputed territory that lies between India and Pakistan, and almost like the fate of these citizens held in suspense, not really knowing which side they belong to. But a lot of these were in different language scripts, and so these were names of freedom fighters from, again, various sources. And initially, I used to literally send these lists to different states to be able to get stamps made in, say, Calcutta, in Madras, Chennai, and so on. And the synonym was a whole body of work with names of people who've gone missing in various regions, north, south, east, west, central zone, but forming portraits of migrants in the city, in the neighborhood where my studio was, in Bandra, and forming portraits of migrants, like I said. And the sort of sense of anonymity of an individual, this vast ocean of humanity where names are often reduced to anonymous statistics. And I was scrolling through these records of those who've gone missing in police records. And again, today it's a lot easier because you have these sources online, and about the sort of democratization of access to material, which wasn't so easy then, and you really had to take permissions, go. It was a long trek trying to get a hold of or, for instance, closet quarries that I actually was reading up about how mason marks that were left behind along the pathways, the stone pathways that lead you to the Taj and other Mughal monument sites, had traces of marks that were left by masons who were involved in the building of these sites. And I wanted to bring these notions of labor on to the surface of the work, and again made several visits to Agra, and where these inscriptions were in various languages, and these kind of symbols, they were more like family symbols of fish, of signs like the bow and arrow, lotus form, and so on, and made hundreds and hundreds of pictures of these, which were then woven into on the surface of the works. And a whole other body of work that carried addresses of monuments that have gone missing, where the Archaeological Survey of India was answerable to the Indian Parliament about what happened to these sites, objects, monuments that, due to rapid urbanization, builder lobby, land grabbing, and so on, and efforts at conservation, preservation on the one hand, were being lost. And I made several visits to Delhi because amongst these 200 object sites, nearly 35 were meant to be protected, of which 12 were in Delhi. And over 2008 and 10, I made visits to many of these and to document and photograph these as sometimes nearly 2 or 3 years of just collating, collecting material that you don't quite know how it's going to shape and define the work that you'll make, but it's part of the process. And along with phrases on architecture and ruins that were woven or sort of interlaced within these addresses. And there were several sites I visited. I'm sort of quickly going to run through these because I think the idea was just to take you through some of the material that gets generated and accumulated, and which you sort of go back to at a later stage maybe and restructure. I mean, so in a sense here, the archive is more a functional resource and a repository of material that you, which is a sort of byproduct of your interests, and it's not necessarily record keeping as a legacy that you would probably leave behind, which of course as artists you're now more and more conscious of. But this was a large sculptural commission for the Bhauraji Art Museum, and it again had to do with the history of the name change and how it's usually geographic, and in the case of Bombay, Mumbai, this was far more political than cultural, and the history of name change, you know, and I worked with street names of Mumbai city that have changed from colonial names to indigenous names, and to form this large web work, which of course alluded to the history of the institution itself, which really came into public consciousness after its restoration a decade ago, and in fact, they, you know, a few days ago celebrated their 10th anniversary after its restoration. And so a lot of the names that are on the surface of the stamps are, this was of course a massive piece weighing nearly 1.5 tons, and for which the whole facade of the museum had to be scaffolded, and these were the names that have now been changed to, gone back to the local names. But of course you sort of move between these multiple names. Again, older pieces from the early 2000s, crease crevice contour that actually traces the changing line of control before the ceasefire line got frozen as the line of control between India, Pakistan, and treats the body almost like a document with these names stamped on the back of a body. But these are names drawn from a peace petition that was drafted in 2004, addressed to both General Pervez Musharraf and to the Indian Prime Minister, calling for peace in the region. And here again, there's a whole list of names that, of which I'm only sharing one of the pages. So these are a lot of the materials that, or for instance, in this video called Synapse, where much of archiving, of course, has to do with memory. And memory, as we know, is a sort of complex set of interactions between seeing, remembering, imagining, some shaped by language, some by imagery. And Synapse was a video where 14 people are getting their eyes tested at an optometrist clinic. It's almost like a health check of the nation, where each of them read an alphabet at a time. And it is a fragmented recital of the preamble of the Constitution of India, which they're not aware of as they read. I mean, it is to do with our own myopias, our own limited understanding of this, you know, of how we interpret texts and how do we process information. And so there is again a whole archive of creating these eye charts that each of them are looking at and reading from, which of course you don't see in the video. to do with perception and how we decipher and encode meaning. Just to run you through a personal archive, I mean, this is a work I made in 2007, having come full circle in my own experience with motherhood, going back to my early childhood years of having lost my mother when I was really young. And as a little girl, I sort of grew up with a number of things she left behind that remained in closed wardrobes for nearly 30 years, and which I sort of secretly would bring out, try on some of her personal belongings, put them back. And there was a time when I really kept going back to her handwritten recipe books, because so much of early motherhood is about nurturing, nourishing, and I would draw from those recipe books. And I decided to translate them into Braille, and I wanted the viewer to experience the kind of inaccessibility to the text, much like my own relationship with her, which was sort of built through inscrutable fragments of memory. And so these are scrolls that carry, like I said, each recipe in Braille, but which was made with the process of tie and dye, where each dot was first drawn, tied, and dyed, where you see the virgin fabric as a text in Braille. But these are from her recipe books. That there's, of course, a lot of material that I didn't really want to bring out in the public domain. These are the making of the tie and dye. Or to come to a last body of work, which I think for the more recent work, this is a work that was, I somehow see it as a genesis of the current body of work that I've been developing. And this was part of a river biennial in Sydney at the Campbelltown Arts Centre, where we were invited to think about rivers, and I decided to work around the river Indus and its multiple tributaries where Ravi beads Satluj flow into India, and the Jhelum, Chenab, and the river Indus into Pakistan, and how we're sort of the partitioning of the waters, and how the conflict sort of really revolves around, or the nucleus of the conflict being around land or natural resources like rivers. And so there was this split within these urns that again allude to these long shared civilizational histories through Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and the terracottas coming from there, and the wall drawing in henna where one half grows into the banyan and the other into the devdhar tree, both national trees of India and Pakistan. And I mean, most of national symbols were really meant to unite people from a region, and they often become points of contestation and conflict where, we try and hold on to our, sort of claim ownership to these natural forms that don't essentially belong to either. And I've been evolving, sort of making these drawings of an imagined species, hybrids that are actually formed with one half coming from each side of the border to form this imagined species. So the Dion, the deer, is a combination of the deer and the lion from Ireland, UK, or the hoopoe, which is the national bird for Israel, with the Palestinian sunbird. And I was reading up about how there was this campaign launched to try and change the name of the Palestinian sunbird simply because it was on the postage stamps in Israel. And how do you sort of, I mean, these are natural forms that are native to a particular land, and how do you sort of claim ownership and co-opt these? And that got me started, and I built a whole archive of these which appear like zoological or botanical drawings, and with a whole range of postcards and coins and a lot of data that's sort of developed looking at not just India, Pakistan, but say North Korea, South Korea, US, Mexico, US, Cuba, Serbia, Croatia, the River Jordan, and that's the sun. So each of these terms are coined. Or the marolf, which is the pine marten and the wolf, and almost like fossil records of these. So, or the PL, which is the doel and the peacock, India and Bangladesh, Egon, the Trojan and the eagle. Or the LOC, the line of control. And again, these are more biological and anatomical drawings, which then take other forms. So yeah, the archive is something that you keep going back to, restructure, which resurfaces in other works and in other forms. But yeah, and it forms a whole universe in itself of these multiple drawings of species imagined forming large landscapes, or sound clips of, again, birds singing in unison. So this is sort of modeled on pre-radar acoustic devices that were used during the World Wars to track sounds of enemy aircrafts. And I wanted to sort of playfully subvert those notions of war, where by having sounds of birds that would sing in unison or converge together, almost in defiance of these man-made divisions on the ground, where nature sort of sees no boundaries and sees no borders. And so this is modeled on these existing devices. And I end with that, but yeah, we will speak more as we continue to carry on these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reena. And Pooja, we're looking forward to hear from you and about Coach.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure to be in Bombay as opposed to Delhi, and I'm delighted to be speaking here at this gorgeous place. You know, when we were looking at the title, which was Foolproofing Art, I think it's an extremely intriguing title. And how do you foolproof art? Maya has, of course, spoken about it, but when I was thinking about it, I said, you know, artists will continue to make work. As they said, you know, even after Auschwitz, there was poetry. But, you know, poetry will be written, music will be made, films will be made. But what happens to the situation or the context within which it's made? What happens to various social organizations and the social context within which we operate? Galleries, publishing houses, small organizations like ours, will they survive? And how will they survive? And I think given how difficult things are all over the world today, you know, across the world, and we've had so many conversations about migration, which was soon going to move to maybe refugees and climate change refugees as well. I think the question that we've been asking ourselves at Coach is, what does it even mean to be an organization today? What does art mean? So what is art? What is Coach? And here I'd like to start by saying what Coach is not. Khoj, as some of you may know or not know, is an Hindi and an Urdu word which means both to search and to find. And I think Khoj is not a museum. It is certainly not a gallery. We're not a research space in a very, very narrow sense of the word. We're not in search of certitudes, and we're certainly not prescriptive. Basically, we really believe in the primacy of the artist. The artist is center stage. And for a long time, since the time we started, it's really been about working for the artist. Everything around it, the curators, the market, the critics, academia, I think it is around the artist, and that's what we completely give preeminence to. We also believe that we need to nurture networks, and this is a space which is like a laboratory, which is where artists and ourselves, as curators, as as art workers, are allowed to make mistakes and fail. Sorry. So how did we get here? We started, we're 20 years old today. In 1997, there were a group of 7 of us, some of them very leading artists of India, Subodh Gupta, Bharti Kher, Anita Dubey, Manisha Parekh, several of us from Delhi, who put down 1,000 rupees and Khoj began, really because we felt very much on the periphery. We felt we needed to create a space for experimentation and exchange. We felt we needed to connect with parts of the world which we didn't know about. And, you know, since everything that we knew was really Eurocentric and American-centric, we just felt we needed also to connect with our locality and with the region and the global south. Today, and that's 20 years on, as an institution, we really believe we're really supported by the community, and we have evolved a unique curatorial practice, we believe, and we have been building an international network. This was our first workshop. This is Subodh's early work, and working in Kaodang. We also had Songdong, so we've very much been wanting to work very locally, but also have a very global understanding. In 2002, we moved to Khirki, which is a small urban village, and it's located in South Delhi. And over the years, it's a mixed neighborhood, but mostly it's a home to migrants from various parts of the world, and most recently to Africans, but equal from Afghanistan and other parts of India. And this is Khoj. We're located here. This is our building. And just to say that what Khoj is and isn't is the way that informs our curation. And before I get back to the slide, what I would really like to talk about is a couple of projects which will unpack the way we curate. So basically, in this winter of 2013, not 2014, we had an MLA. This is an MLA of the area, Delhi's Law Minister, Somnath Bharti. He and his supporters conducted an illegal raid in Khirki on some African women under the charges of drugs and abuse. This became huge national headlines. We saw the Africans come into Khirki because we've been there since 2002, and it was a kind of peaceful coexistence. We knew there were a huge number of people because we were quite excited because we had a lot of underground African cafes and kitchens that existed. So we knew them, but there was a kind of, yeah, they're here, but it really didn't matter. After this happened, and this is what really happened at that point, I think we really had to take stock of the kind of horrible, horrible racism that exists in India. And we're recipients of racism across the world, but we are equally bad, and especially with the Africans. I mean, they're abused, they are called horrible names, they said they eat their babies. And this was a time when, this was what happened there. Sorry, okay.
The mic doesn't pick.
Sorry. So for a couple, we kept quiet for a while because, of course, the press was there and they wanted our reaction, and we just felt that was not where we wanted to be. And after a couple of months, we were working with anthropologist who had been doing work with some hip-hop children, boys in the region, in young African boys. And he showed a film called Cry Out Much Louder, which was horrible. I mean, it really picked up. It was made by the African boys about their living in India. And several of them spoke beautiful Hindi, absolutely perfect. They understood every word. It was after that we decided that we really needed to address this through art practice, because that's what we are. We're an arts organization. And we worked with some of the African women there. One of them being Fatima. She's a Somalian, beautifully well-educated lady who had to leave Somalia. She was a refugee. And over a period of almost a year, one of our curators at Khoj, as well as a graphic artist, we made this a graphic novel, which parts of which you can see. And it's really a stages of a refugee's journey, very beautifully illustrated. And we were able to share it with people. We began to bring in a lot of the African people into Khoj to talk about their projects. So just to say that we are very, very local. It was because of the incident that happened that we wanted to begin to work on it. And then it was really globally informed, because when we began to do research, we realized that there was a lot that needed we needed to think about. We had the Africans who came in as a slave dynasty way back and rose to be kings. During the non-aligned movement, we had a huge number of Africans that came into India and studied here. And then suddenly, 80s and 90s, nothing, till 2000. What was causing this? So we did a lot of research. We brought in Antony from Chimurenga from South Africa. For about almost 3-4 months, we invited people to talk about this. And then put out a residency called Coriolis Effect, which we've done a 3rd edition, so over 3 years. And we put out an open call, and from Indian and people from Africa, or people who are thinking about such issues from Africa, we've done this. We had several workshops. So this was one of the artists, Bernard Akoy Jackson. This is Andrew Ananda Fogel. And this was really referencing a current incident that had happened in Bangalore, where an African student was pulled out of an auto rickshaw and beaten up. So if you say that, they were beaten with their tire irons for sitting while Indians stood. And this is what he's done on some very beautiful textiles. While we were working on this, we also work very closely with community, and we've been supporting socially engaged practice. So some of the artists that have been working with us have been really looking at modes of representation, so of technology, very low tech. And so Swati set up a beautiful little shop outside Khoj, where she would exchange music. You know, you take a phone and you need to recharge it for 10 rupees. And with that, she said, can I give you some music? And she would give the Biharis some Congolese music. She would give the Congolese some Bihari music. And over a period of time with this exchange, they wanted to make their own videos. And we started doing talk shows. And this is the little green with the green background. And really, we began to get the community to speak to each other. So just going back to how we curate, I think what I really wanted to say is that while we are very, very locally engaged, it's really about asking a lot of questions, about not wanting too many answers, but really saying, how do we take an idea, put out a proposition, invite artists to respond to it. And then in the next year, because we do it for at least 3 years, we stay with the thematic, we invite other artists to pick up on what we've learned and respond to it again. So I think that's the way we like to curate, and we curate across 3 verticals, so to speak. One is we've really looked at a lot of mediums. So if you can see, we have ecology, sound, food, fashion. And we've done several projects around that. So we were probably one of the first people who started looking at performance art in 2004 or 2003. We've looked at sound art, we've looked at gaming, art and gaming, and more recently art and science. But we've 10 years looking at various efforts around ecology, both with Indian and international artists. And most recently, we did a mock trial where which was Landscape as Evidence, Artist as Witness, which was with Sulekha Chaudhary, who's also a theater practitioner, where we invited 3 artists to present their work with a round of, which was argued by 2 real live lawyers and a retired judge. And we were really thrilled at that point to have, sitting at the Constitution Club, where we enacted this 3-hour-long performance, fiction, reality, to have Justice Chandrachud, who sat through that and said, I think this needs to happen at the Supreme Court for lawyers. So it's, art can make a difference, but it's really about asking, what can art do? But we were really asking questions of loss. We were asking questions of a river linking project, which would take away land from various people. But there were several philosophical questions that we were asking through art projects. And so, as we said, that we are a small organization, and that is very locally relevant, and that's what we like to believe, but globally informed. And then finally, I'd just like to come quickly back to some of our values, where, as I said, we're really into the primacy of ideas, because that's what really excites us. Therefore, it is a laboratory for artists to push their ideas. Several of our projects feed into each other and grow as we begin to excavate more questions. And we feel very rooted in our locality. And I don't mean just Khirki, but in India and in South Asia. One of the things that we've done over the years is really build solidarities and networks. And in starting 1997, when we started Khoj, we realized we knew nothing, absolutely nothing of what was happening in the region. And so it was really exciting when Claire pointed out a letter in 1992 between Sousa and somebody in because there were individual relationships, but in terms of really understanding. And don't forget, we didn't have the internet where you could Google everything, or things would magically appear at the end of a mouse. And so really to connect with the region, which we were so kind of broken, was something that we felt very strongly. And I myself personally, since my parents came as refugees from Pakistan, it was really something that and I'd grown up with these stories, I felt very, very close to. And I think over the years, I was really, really privileged to get some money from HIVOS to set up a South Asia network, which was setting up similar organizations like Khoj in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, which continue to exist, most of them, which have done incredible work in supporting contemporary practice, and also believe in really working at a grassroots level as we do. And in that, just recently in November, we decided to organize, given what's been happening all over the world, we decided to organize a 3-day seminar called Asia Assemble, as an assembly. And it was really to ask several questions and to build solidarities in difficult times, to try and understand the kind of strategies small organizations, artists who work in very difficult areas, other than including ours, or can we share that? Can we build these micro-solidarities that are so important for us to have? And just to say, we had people like Yong-Hee Chang. This was a very beautiful sound piece, which they do with text and sound. We also framed it under the New Silk Route, or the new China road and belt, the belt, One Belt, One Road, which China is now doing. And we really wanted to understand what the implications of that might mean for Asia together. Because it is really, in a sense, looking at it in a very, very strong way. And so here we had a work by Jagan Vincent Paul, who's Sri Lankan, and who had started investigating the ports, including the one in Sri Lanka, which is being built by the Chinese. And these are 2 posters, some of the work that he'd put out, 2 posters that it's tongue-in-cheek of how the One Belt, One Road would be advertised. So if you can see, belongs to the whole world. Join a project that goes beyond regions, stages of development and civilizations. That's the way one might imagine, I mean, tongue-in-cheek, of course. But the other one, the natural order, where he takes a quip at the way the Chinese might speak. I think this 3-day conference really made us realize that there's so much in common and so much that we need to constantly talk to each other. And I think places like Asia Art Archive, which are putting in art histories which we need to build, and several spaces across Asia which are constantly having these conversations are very, very important. And we're really grateful to be part of that as well. And so I think the most important thing looking forward is we have to remain relevant to our times. And I think we constantly continue to ask questions. We want to innovate new ideas. We do see ourselves as a lab. And I think we have created a third space which is outside of the museum and the gallery. It's a very vital space, which I think many of us need to fill. And I think artists feel comfortable being part of that as they move very comfortably between the museums, the galleries, all of which make for a very strong ecosystem. And so finally, to go back to future-proofing, I think it's the need to create an ecosystem for the arts, and I think we're part of that, trying to build that. It's to stimulate, nurture, and at the same time protect these spaces for free thinking, which I think couldn't be more urgent as in our day-to-day, and possibly to respond to the signs of our times. And that's what I'm hoping that spaces like Khoj can continue to do by asking crucial questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. Well, unfortunately, we heard so many wonderful things from all 3 of you. We have barely any time left for questions. Yes, we have a total of 10 minutes until we need to vacate the premises. But I think maybe we can dive in with one question I had that each of you could answer, and then hopefully we maybe get to another one. So we heard from the 3 of you what your practices and your different projects you work on have to do with this idea of moving forward. And the future is always something that relies on the past to some extent. And my question is, what do you see for your practice Coach and the Asia Archive. How do the next 20 years or 17 years look like, and where are you moving with your project?
I mean, that's a good question. I think even though an archive definitely suggests the past and perhaps where we will be in the future, for us it's really about understanding where we are in the present. At the same time I say that, and the archive, we have a responsibility of custodianship to those that we have material donated from. And so really we have been working very hard to set up a governance structure and a system and a foundation that will ensure that the archive will be around for a long time to come, hopefully beyond my time. And I realize that, I don't want to, I think for me the true test will be whether the archive can continue and go strong without me. And I'm excited about, other directors that will take the helm and bring different visions to the organization. So.
How do you see your art moving into the future, and how do you feel about future-proofing art as an artist?
Well, I mean, I was delighted to be sharing this panel with, friends I've known for decades now, and I think, as an artist, my practice is fairly organic, and I don't necessarily, think and plan so much for the future, but I think this vital role that each of these, and this ecosystem that we spoke about is so essential, because each of us can be working in our own little individual practices, but the fact that, Khoj and what it's played a vital role since its inception in terms of a space for experimentation, and how the power structures have dissolved because of, constantly changing hands between different artists, and how the galleries contribute here in the absence of an institutional space. So it's really the kind of publications, the kind of archive material that's generated. We live in this information age where the internet has certainly totally transformed the scene and democratized access to information. And so yeah, there are a whole range of challenges, but I think the future is full of possibility, and yeah, so a lot that fuels the practice and nurtures it and sustains it, and I think, yeah, we just have to all work together to...
Just briefly back to you as an artist, and specifically, even though you draw from source material and archives as much, so from what I hear, you don't think much about the archival of your own work, yet.
I'm conscious of it. I'm aware that there is a legacy or the residue of the practice that will survive, and but I think as artists, you don't necessarily look at the preciousness of that all the time. It's the idea is to really playfully work with it and move on and refashion it, reshape it, and go back to it maybe. And it's a living thing. It's not something that you're only holding on to or nostalgic or from the preservation perspective as much as a...
It's very much in the now.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know about 20 years from now, because I'm really thinking about 3 years from now, which would be where I think we need to actually just survive, because we're really, one would imagine that after 20 years we wouldn't be in the precarious position that we are, but we are. We're constantly having to fundraise. We constantly have to think of our money. Apart from that, I think it's also important that, and we have begun to do that and put things in place, to find new people and who will then take over, which is what they must do. Because far too often in our part of the world, institutions which are, where you have individuals who've run it for a long time, they kind of dissolve after. And that would be a pity, because I think we need several such institutions like Khoj across India and South Asia. We just need so much to happen that I'm sure it will happen. If we can survive financially, etc., I'm sure we'll be able to get really new energy, new ways of thinking, and really it'll be up to them and the younger generation to take that forward. So that's the way I see it.
I think I'm getting signs from the wings. So unfortunately, at this point, we would have loved to take questions from the audience. We would have loved to... Can we do one question? Well, does anyone have a question for our panelists? Well, there we go. I think the questions were answered, and I thank all of you for your time and for your amazing presentations and your contribution in your various fields to future-proofing art and also art and art practice and archiving art in general. And yeah, to many, many more happy returns.
On behalf of Mumbai Gallery Weekend, all the galleries that have been involved with this particular platform, I really want to thank the Royal Opera House and thank you so much for such an engaging conversation. Each of you have given so much depth to each what you've said. And Mumbai Gallery Weekend is really about knowledge sharing. I mean, this platform that we bring is not just about the gallery shows, which of course is important, but you know, why Asia Art Archive? Why Claire? Why Khoj? Why Reena, the artist who represents other artists, and Artsy as a platform? It's such an intersection, our lives here. I mean, I was just looking at each of you, and our lives are so entwined with each other. So we're really, really very glad to have had this, and those of you who've been privileged to be here, I'm sure you've enjoyed this engaging conversation. So thank you, Pooja. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Reena. And thank you, Maya, for jumping on ship as Artsy representative. It's wonderful to have you here.